to second string, where we talk all other tech. Now, this particular story kind of shocked me a little bit because I didn't realize that it wasn't the case. But AT&T becomes the first U.S. carrier to support 911 location-based routing. So essentially, when you call 911 from your cell phone, they now have the technology or allowing this feature to actually pinpoint where the caller is calling from when they call into 911, regardless of where you are. I live in Atlanta. I have an Atlanta number, but say I am in DC and, I need to get emergency services or need to get help. They won't look specifically based on my phone number. They'll look based on my geographic location. So apparently this feature uses your device's GPS and hybrid information. I'm not sure what the hybrid information is, to direct the call to the correct call center. I'm assuming a combination of where you are and maybe the cell towers that your phone is pinging from. And instead of sending me to Atlanta, because I have an Atlanta-based number for 911, they can send me to a DC call center to better serve me. And like I said, I'm pretty surprised that this wasn't already in place, which is fairly interesting. But they're saying that this is going to improve your 911, I guess, locating. Currently, is typically in a 10-mile radius of where you called, but now a device will be able to be routed within 50 meters of your location. 50 meters is super close, especially compared to a 10-mile radius. So if you are in dire straits and you really need some help, and if you're calling 911, you probably are, this will get emergency responders to you more quickly.
So this hasn't been the case. For example, like if you go on your phone now and try to turn on Wi-Fi calling, in order to turn on Wi-Fi calling, you have to update your emergency address. In order to update your emergency address, you got to put in your home address where you live in order to then enable Wi-Fi calling. The reason why they do that is because if you do call 911 from your phone based on your emergency address, that's where they're going to send police, fire, medical emergency, things of that nature too. So that has always been the case. With iPhones, you assume that it's not, that they can just not randomly, accurately triangulate where you are because you have a cell phone. No, that's definitely, that hasn't been the case. But now it seems like AT&T, it makes sense for cellular companies to offer this service. But again, the problem is privacy, right?
Right.
What is, or what can AT&T do with your precise location
Location.
data, especially when Apple has tried pretty hard to protect users' location data? Because if you go through the iPhone settings for all the apps, for any sort of third-party services, you can go in location services and say, do you want them to know your accurate location, precise, and let me even say it more specific, precise location,
Yep.
or do you want them just to know your generalized location? You can go in there
Mm-hmm.
and set those settings. All that to say, Apple is like, for real, for real, for real, we don't want nobody outside of the owner of this phone to actually know where you are. This with AT&T saying, hey, if you call 911, we're going to do our best to try to find you. How does that bump heads with Apple's privacy services? One, and then two, like I mentioned before, what can or will AT&T do with your location data? Is it going to be just for emergency purposes, which is what they say, or capitalism, data
Run amok.
sales,
Yeah.
will it come up, and in the end user license agreement, will it say AT&T has the right to sell your location data to third party services, blah, 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 blah,
Mm-hmm.
and we're right back to, okay, my data, is it private or not?
Right.
Most people would agree, I want somebody to know exactly where I am if there's an emergency. but only if you're going to use it just for emergencies. And I think that's where a lot of these companies trip up, right?
Yeah. And it seems like, AT&T figured that people would have these types of questions. So, in the article that we're reading on 9 to 5 Mac, AT&T says that the location-based routing feature only turns on when someone calls 911. And it clarifies that the only people receiving your location information are the dispatchers at the call center.
Okay. Again, you got to make sure the call center,
Right.
again, because, and I'm not, I'm not this super secretive person, but I know companies
Yeah.
and I know data is most and
It's
utmost
king.
of important. And if they can figure out a way to monetize your location based data, it wouldn't be surprised if knowingly or unknowingly that data leaks or gets stolen or gets hacked
Right.
or gets sold.
Yeah. So hopefully, because it appears that it's using first, is it
A third
FirstNet?
party company.
A third party company. Yeah.
Mhm.
First. I'm trying to find their name first.
First net.
FirstNet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Using end-to-end emergency communication solutions to support those in public safety. So I would hope that AT&T did their due diligence, but again, you never
Com-
know.
so
You never
companies
know.
trip up all the time, totally unrelated, but kind of going to the point to where companies say one thing, but if it really go down, something else. For
And
example,
another
now,
thing happens.
and I don't want to. I'm going to get off the tangent, but not really. Coinbase, they just put out. Somebody just leaked or revealed their terms as it relates to your cryptocurrency stored in their vault, for lack of a better term. They basically said, "Yo, this is Coinbase," and I'm paraphrasing. If we ever get caught up or jammed up with bankruptcy, or we get sued, or we've got this major pending financial case that's hanging over our heads, we can use your uh, uh, cryptocurrency
Currency.
for those purposes, right? You assume the whole point of cryptocurrency is it's decentralized, it's
Right.
peer to peer. If I want to keep my money in this wallet and I want to
Off the
send
grid, so to
off
speak.
the grid, anonymized, and I want to send Nica some data, some crypto, or whatever the case may be, I should be able to send that directly to her without anybody else being involved. Well, according to Coinbase, that's
Nah,
the
B.
thought. But now, when you get into the weeds, they're like, "Yo, blah blah blah, X, Y, and Z," right? So to relate this back to the story that we're talking about now, AT&T could have all the best good
Intentions.
intentions, right? To say, "Oh, we're only going to use this for first response. It's only going to turn on this," and then 2 years down the road, there's going to be a
Data
story
breach.
to where first, what is it, first net
FirstNet.
sub, they changed their end user license agreement to say, in order to provide you with the best services, some data may be utilized to analyze, which all rolls down to we sold your data.
Right. Pretty much. So it's out there. It's coming. The rollout is actually going on right now across the whole country. It's already available in Alaska, Colorado, Hawaii, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, Washington, Wyoming, Kansas, Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, North Dakota, Missouri, Nebraska, South Dakota, and Guam. So it seems like a lot of the middle western part of the country has already has access to this feature. So it'll be interesting to see how it, if they're really true to their word and are really only turning this on and off when you use 911. And they expect this full rollout to be complete come the end of June. So I am an AT&T customer. I will have this on my phone, I presume. So here's to hoping that I, one, never have to use this service, because if I do, that means something's wrong. And hopefully, again, AT&T is doing what they said they will do
You
with
hope,
this
right?
data. That's all you can do. I mean, it really is a crapshoot. I think we talked about it a little bit last week with Echo and how they were using your voice controlling automations to sell you things and
Mm-hmm.
give you instant ads your way. So you can only hope for the best, but we know the country that we live in and we know how capitalism works. So you just hope for the best and hope that things are actually working the way they should and people are true to their word. But again, time will tell. We'll see if in a couple years there's something that comes out. But again, fingers crossed. Hopefully, folks will do right and keep their word. Next up, Texas is in the news. This story just launched today because of, as of today, Instagram's parent company, Meta, has removed the ability to use filters on Instagram for all Texas residents. So if you're in Texas and you try and put a filter on your image in Instagram and it doesn't work, the reason why is because Texas basically sent a notice to Meta that says, "Hey, you got to pull this from your app for our residents because Texas is saying that the filters violate their facial recognition laws." So essentially, in a nutshell, Texas is saying that by being able to use these filters, you are mapping a person's face and overlaying whatever image the filter has. And this in turn is violating the laws that Texas has in place for facial recognition. Their attorney general, Ken Paxton, he filed a lawsuit against the company, citing that the technology that they're using in these filters is a misuse of the facial rec technology. And the lawsuit also says that Meta, which is a parent company again of Instagram, cannot use Texans' biometric information and keep it stored within their system without the consent and or knowledge beforehand. So before the person uses the filter, they have to have their consent. So they're basically saying if you're on Instagram and you decide to use a filter, you are not giving your consent to use facial recognition according to Texas law. Now, some folks are up in arms about this because they're saying it's just a filter, it's no big deal, let me have my fun. Some people are saying, look at Texas protecting its citizens from facial recognition abuse. Again, not sure which side of the aisle, most people have fallen on. It seems pretty even from what I've seen, just, being on social media. But again, Texas is not the only one who is wrapped up in this. Illinois has the same thing as well in their Biometric Information Privacy Act. So these filters have now been removed for both Texas and Illinois, citing privacy concerns as it uses these augmented AR reality filters within the state, and that is violating their laws. I actually had another story in place of this, and it was regarding Elon and him saying he'll let Trump back on. No surprise there. And when I saw this pop up, I was like, we definitely have to talk about this. And if this is truly an abuse of technology by Instagram on these filters, is it just, Texas and Illinois being overreactionary, or do you think this is actually something for users to be concerned about?
On its face, it's a little of both. Texas is being a little bit extra by forcing Meta to force Instagram to turn off these filters for all its residents. But on its face, on merit, it Texas should have went a little bit further and not a little bit further. They should have went a different direction and said, instead of saying, "Hey, cut this off," they should have said, "We petition," or whatever the legal term is for, you need to show us specifically what you're using your biometric data for. We petition all this stuff, and they bring Facebook or Meta or whomever to the table and say, we need to know, what are you doing with this data? Now, if Meta says, all we do is use it to provide better filters, we're not selling your data, we're not storing your data, we're not using it to create other services, we're not doing any of those things. All we're doing is giving users the ability to accurately put filters on their faces, whether it be bunny ears or makeup or whatever the case, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
That's all we're using it for. And then Texas says, okay, well, you can use it for this, that, and this, but you can't use it for this, that, and the other, right? That to me would have been a better direction than turn it off. We don't like it. We are protecting our citizens, because there's some other ways that I can think of that Texas could be better doing to
Protecting their
protect their
citizens.
citizens, right? But that's
Yeah.
neither here nor there. Um, uh, but again, like we mentioned in the previous stories, companies should be more forthright in what they're doing with our data. Again, the problem with our data is we're using these services for free. What we're giving up is our data. So
Yeah.
we're paying with our data. So these companies are looking at it as, if if we're not charging you, or you're not paying us for it, for the service, we need to get our money's worth. And our
Right.
money's worth is your data. You're going to have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
And probably most people are. But again, the problem is these companies are not telling us, or they should disclose exactly how they're using our data, and they're not. So that's
I
where
can
and that's where I think Texas and
miss the
Illinois
mark.
are kind of not do. They're just, it seems like they're grandstanding,
Yeah.
because the real thing would be to disclose exactly how you're losing data, using the data, and then Meta has to decide. They got to make a game decision. They say, okay, do we really tell them what we're really doing with the data, or
Mm-hmm.
are we sure? We understand. We want you to feel secure. We want you to know your data is private. We're not doing this and that. So sure, here's all the things we're doing with it, and then you let the people decide. Okay, that's right. That's wrong. I wanted to do this. I don't want to do that. Right.
Right. So the AG is saying that the reason the filters break the law, which is called Texas Capture or Use of Biometric Identifier Act, who, that's a mouthful. He's saying that the the biometrics that they capture, they learn the particular user's face, and they can automatically tag them or associate them with an image without the consent of the person being tagged. So it's basically, if we take a picture together and our metrics are in there, it'll automatically tag you in my photo. This is what Texas is saying. So that means you're not giving your consent to be tagged in my photo or to be mentioned in my photo, even though you took the photo with me. I think what this is actually going to lead to is, because you're saying, you aren't giving your consent. I think when you start to use these filters, I wouldn't be surprised if after all of this is said and done, there's going to be an Instagram rollout, a Facebook rollout that says when you click on to use a filter, you're going to have to click I consent, or you're going to have to do some sort of acknowledgement or consent that, yes, I approve this image being used. Yes, I approve, being able to use it. It's going to be some sort of, kind of like the Apple tracking, when you open an app, it
Ask
says
app not to
allow
track,
it, the
which is
ask. Yeah.
fine, right? But I don't even think Texas and Illinois is doing that. They're like, no, don't use it. Instead of saying, let's come up with a way to let users know exactly how you're using their data, and let's come up with a way to give users the ability to consent or not to actually using your data. Let's come up with a way to do that. Texas didn't even do that. They're just
Yeah,
like,
that's what I'm saying.
shut it
It's
off.
the back door that I think Meta is going to use for this, because you got Texas, you got Illinois. So who's to say that more states aren't going to come with this same sort of thing? So to kind of head it all off, at the head before any other states get involved in this. I think they're going to add some sort of consent
Mhm.
or in this that says, or they're going to add in their user agreement, if you use a filter, you are consenting for A, B, C, and D. I think this is going to be, a new kind of catch-all way for Meta, Instagram, all of them, Facebook, to say, okay, we asked you for your consent, and in order to use this filter, you have to give us your consent. And people using these filters, they're just going to click OK because they want to use the filter because it's cute. They aren't going to see, I guess, the larger issues in this. They just want a cute picture to post on their feed and keep it moving. So again, like you, I do believe that both Texas and Illinois really did miss the mark on making some significant change and some significant impact here. All just to say, we took down Facebook, we sued Meta, and we had them, we forced them to take this down. But my question is it location based? So say I'm not a Texas resident, but I'm visiting Texas. So if I'm visiting Texas and I'm not a Texas resident, does this apply to me? Or is it just for people who say they live in Texas or have a Texas phone number? How are they determining what
They don't know
constitutes a citizen?
because you could probably use a VPN on your phone and change your location if you're in Texas, and then boom.
Or yeah, or get like a Google number and put that on your account, or say you're from somewhere else. Similar to when people say you got to be 13 to use this app, they just add some years to their birthday to make them legal to use the app.
Right.
So I would be interested to see how they are determining who lives in Texas, or is it just if you're visiting Texas?
They ain't figured that out.
Interesting. But for now, Texas users, if you want to use some filters, you're going to have to find another way around it if you want to use filters on Instagram. All right. The next thing in second string, I saw this and it really came to mind because in the last few weeks, we've seen a lot of tech companies lay off people. Even so much, there's a website where you can go to kind of track who's laying off. Netflix laid off a bunch of people. And Netflix has a bunch of other issues going on. Actually, Meta laid off a bunch of people. I think both Google and Facebook have put freezes on the hiring process. So basically, people are saying that another tech bust is coming because of the amount of tech companies that are laying off folks, all while them saying we need people, the space is just so busy, we have to have people. So it's one of those things where it's starting to seem that the fire is starting to build a bit, for those of us who work in tech, that massive layoffs around the whole space may be coming. And again, the website that I mentioned is called layoffs.fyi, and it's a crowdsourced website that just lists companies that have cut jobs since the beginning of the pandemic. But it's one of those things where we've seen, I think Peloton, they lost like 500 million last quarter. So they laid off a bunch of people before. Now they're laying off a bunch of people again. It just seems like, I don't know if it's because of the pandemic. I don't know if it's because of inflation going up, or I don't know if it's because of companies trying to trim the fat to gird their loins in the case of a recession. It just seems like a lot of focus and a lot of activity is flurrying and swooshing around all these different companies when it comes to laying off and downsizing their tech population.
Well, Peloton may not be a good barometer because you can't, after you sell everybody the bike and the treadmill, then what?
Right.
You can
And you
say that,
can't give the app for free and people can go buy a full Peloton like I did and just have a dedicated iPad and
well,
pay
your
just for the
bread and butter
service.
were the devices, even though the recurring cost is the subscription. That ain't that ain't enough to cover, how expensive that hardware was. So once people, one, when they sold them to enough people, that slowed it down. And then two, the pandemic. Once the pandemic kind of, well, when people are over the pandemic now and they're going back to the gyms, they're going
Yep.
back outside or whatever, they're not on these bikes no more. And some of them are getting returned or whatever the case may be, or subscriptions getting canceled, right? So
Right.
that's Peloton may not be a good barometer, but some of these other companies that are either freezing and or laying off. Bottom line thing, companies when they need to get ready for bad quarters, not bad quarters, but if they don't make as much money as they forecast, that is considered a bad quarter. So companies are getting ready to report a lot of quarters that to where they didn't make as much money as forecast. So what's the first thing they do is skim off the bottom line, which is lay off people. That seems to be for
The
whatever
quickest and
reason,
the easiest.
the easiest way to do it. Instead of changing practices, instead of reducing salaries for uh, 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 the CEOs and CFOs, and getting rid of
Cutting
some of
some of
the,
these huge bonuses that they
and all
pay
these huge
out
bonuses
uh,
and profit sharing
to their
and
execs, not to
and
like
for
the
all
regular
these
people.
things,
Yeah.
there's probably a bunch of things as a whole corporations could do, but the easiest, quickest way is to say we reduced overhead by laying off people. So that's what they're going to do. It makes sense because in the real estate market, I read a story to where a lot of mortgage um, processing companies are starting to lay off mortgage processing people who process mortgages, because the people who are buying up the houses are paying in cash,
Cash.
so they
You know,
don't
these
need
huge investment
mortgages.
companies, so they don't need them.
Right. That means people who use mortgages are either getting outbid to where they can't pay up for a mortgage, or they've just completely stopped, which that's another indicator of a recession coming, when mortgage companies aren't processing mortgages because these investment companies are buying them all up and renting everywhere. So everybody's renting, nobody's buying. That's another indication. So, yes, I agree in the fact that we need to pay attention to this, because these tech companies trimming the fat um, is because something's coming. So read the tea leaves, get prepared, do whatever the case may do, whatever you need to do. If you are in the tech sector or work for a tech company, you know be prepared. I can't
Yeah.
tell you what to do. Save up money, find another job, whatever the case may be, but these are indicators that something is coming,
Yep.
and
For
they ain't
sure.
gonna lose money, so they gonna make us
Nope.
lose it.
Exactly. So definitely, be on your P's and Q's because it is a lot of different things swirling around all at the same time. And, when people start to get a little antsy, rather than taking a beat and making a thoughtful decision, they go with the easy on them route without, really considering the implications of the human capital that is involved in these decisions.